Welcome to the speaker series on a shot glass of recovery. This podcast is a place for real stories, honest conversations, and recovery lived one day at a time. The views and opinions shared here are simply our own personal experiences. We do not speak for or represent Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole.
You get a house, you get a car, then you start thinking that's all you are, but you don't know the truth. So let me spell it out for you. Now I got your attention, now there's a start. Now sit and listen to my favorite part. Life's been giving us some clues. The answer lies inside of you.
I'm Peter Mantis. I'm an alcoholic, and my sobriety date is November 18th, 2003. Thanks to the program and the people of Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink since that day. I've rarely thought of a drink. I certainly haven't thought about drinking up until this moment. I always say I'm not a white chip wonder because I'm still walking the earth. And so in spite of the way I feel today, I might feel differently tomorrow. I don't think that I will, but I'm not complacent in my recovery. I am not lackadaisical in my recovery, but I firmly believe that I've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, as it talks about in the foreword to the first edition. And that simply means for me, as long as I don't put alcohol in me, it doesn't matter if I think about it. It doesn't matter if it's around me. If I don't put it in my body, then I'm free from the problem of alcohol, as the book talks about. The alcohol problem has been solved in that respect. So, and I have all you people to thank for it. So I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and I was adopted. My first few years of life were just idyllic, and there were no problems. I had no trauma. Life was beautiful. And then I turned 3 and things really started going downhill from there. There was a lot going on in my family. There was a lot of things that go on. There was a lot of drama. There was a lot of arguments, a lot of fighting. There was some verbal abuse and all that sort of thing. I used to talk about that a lot. And then I realized none of that really mattered other than to kind of set things up as to why I picked up, my first drink. I'm not blaming that for what happened. I'm not blaming any of my past. I'm not blaming any person, place, or thing for why I drank. That was my own personal choice. But it certainly opened up the possibilities for me to pick up a drink more than I think if those things hadn't happened. I don't really know. I don't know if I was born with alcoholism, like some people say. If I did, then I've broken the family curse. I don't know anything about my biological family other than, my background, my ethnicity, and things like that. My adoptive parents did not drink to excess, but they drank regularly. I'm a child of the 60s, and the way my father was back in the day, he worked for a big advertising company in Chicago. And back then, they had martini lunches. So they would drink at lunch, but I never saw my dad drunk, ever. And my parents would go to the liquor store and load up a shopping cart full of liquor, and they'd bring it home. And my dad would come home every night and a little shot glass, and he would put some brandy in and he'd sip it. And when I look back on it, I thought, man, that's alcohol abuse. I would never be able to sip a glass of brandy, but he used to sip it. And they had all this liquor around the house and they entertained with liquor. But I never saw my dad drunk. So it wasn't my parents. I know a lot of people have an alcoholic parent. I did not. My dad had a lot of friends who were alcoholics, but I was not exposed to that at all. But I did have an older brother who was, let's just say he was not a nice guy. He was also adopted from a different family. And I think the things that happened to me as a child, like I said, that didn't make me an alcoholic, but I reacted to those things that happened to me kind of as a trauma response. And I really believe that alcohol kind of saved me a lot of times because of that. And I had a lot of fun with it until I didn't. So I had a 25-year drinking career. I love how we talk about alcoholism as a career, but I had a 25-year drinking career. I didn't start early. I hear people a lot in AA talk about they had their first drink when they were 7 or 8, something like that. Or, when they were 9 years old, they had their first drunk when they were 9 years old. That was not my situation. I didn't drink until I was 18. And I was coming from Chicago. I came down to go to school in Tampa, the University of South Florida. I was 18, and back then the drinking age was 18. August 1980. And the drinking age was changed in January of sorry, January of 81. But I got grandfathered in. So thanks to the state of Florida, I got an extra 3 years. And I used to blame it on the state of Florida. I used to blame my alcoholism on the state of Florida. I used to blame my alcoholism on the bartenders that that fed me too much booze. I used to blame it on the police officers who arrested me for drunk driving, you know, almost killing people and everything. It was their fault. It's always their fault. And Alcoholics Anonymous taught me that I need to be responsible for my own actions, that I cannot blame any person, place, or thing for my alcoholism, or frankly, for that matter, my behavior. So even today, if I behave the way I used to, then I can't blame my alcoholic mind for it. That was the thing early in sobriety. I always say, well, that's my alcoholic mind. That's my alcoholic mind. Well, I'm in recovery now. I don't have an alcoholic mind. Sometimes I'm just being a jerk, you know? That's just the way it is. And the way I was taught the steps in Alcoholics Anonymous is that surrender comes in step 1, 2, and 3, and it's not a passive surrender. It's really more of an assertive surrender that says that it's more of an intention that I lay out and say, okay, I'm not in charge anymore. I'm not the arbiter of everything that happens around me or what people do or what happens to me. In fact, there's very little I can control. It's rather infinitesimal compared to the things that are out of my control, especially when it comes to other people. And so those first 3 steps is me acknowledging that to some extent, especially in that step 1, that saying that I'm powerless over alcohol. That's the ultimate ego deflator for an alcoholic like me. And so there was that surrender in steps 1, 2, and 3. Step 4, I dig it up. Step 5 through 9, I clean it up. Step 10, I clean it up daily. And step 11, I review and refine going forward. So that's the way I was told. And of course, step 12, carry the message to another alcoholic, which is the gold lining in the whole thing. And I always felt like I was a nice guy when I was drinking. I just felt like I was, kind of a kooky drunk. I always felt like I was a funny drunk. I always felt like I could dance, like a masterful dancer when I was drunk. Better, better. But I really wasn't nice because I wasn't being myself and I was putting people in harm's way. So I started drinking when I was 18. There was a bar across the street from where I lived. I lived in an off-campus dorm. I went to the University of South Florida, and I hadn't had a drink until then. And when I went there to that bar, I started, and as most of you know how that feels. Well, some people say they didn't feel it the first time. I can tell you that when I took that drink for the first time, that was a magic elixir. And pardon me. And it all started like in a big way. Like I was drinking alcoholically from the beginning. And as it turns out, I was a binge drinker. I didn't drink every day. I didn't drink every night. But when I drank, I drank. I drank a lot. I drank for a long period of time. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but sometimes I would drink myself clear. You drink so much that you just feel like you sobered up. The next morning I'm like, wow, I'm clear, man. And then I'd hit the Waffle House for the gourmet breakfast from the night before, and it was the best thing I ever tasted, after a night of carousing and drinking. And I don't know if you guys had this up there, but for those of you who are in Canada, but there was a phenomenon in here called the Bottle Club. And so what it is after all the bars closed down at 3 o'clock in the morning, you would go to a bottle club, but they couldn't sell alcohol after 3 o'clock. So what you did, you bring your own booze, you give it to them, you pay to get in, you pay for your bottle, they put it behind the bar, and then you take the chips that you bought for your own booze to pay for the booze. And then that's the loophole. And so, you're drinking all night, and then you get 3 a.m. and I mean, you know, I'm paying for my own booze. So I pay for my own booze and I'm drinking till 8 a.m. I mean, that's alcoholic behavior right there. And then I get out like 8 o'clock in the morning, clear, or at least that's the way it appeared. Obviously I wasn't. And then, I would do my thing and then do it again, repeat it again that night. And that's just a crazy, crazy way to live. And I was that kind of guy who I like going out when I drank. I did not like being alone. So I like to go to bars. I like to go to clubs. I like to dance. I like to, you know, approach people. I'd like to do all that stuff. And really, in retrospect, it was clear to me that what I was doing was fighting my loneliness and my uncomfortability with myself. And AA has taught me to be comfortable in my own skin. A lot of what you hear from me is stuff you hear all the time in AA. We're all connected by our stories, and we all certainly have different stories, unique stories, but at the same time, we have a common thread, right? A lot of the stuff we talk about, other people said over and over and over again. And so that's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. And so becoming comfortable in my own skin, that was a real deal in Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you, Alcoholics Anonymous, for that. And so it's a 25-year deal for me. First time I got a DUI. I don't know, they call it, I think other people call it a DWI, driving while intoxicated, driving under the influence. It was right before New Year's. And the way they do it here is first of all, you have to go to a victim's impact panel, which was the hardest thing. So for 2 hours, you basically watch people come on stage and talk about losing their loved ones to people like me who are driving drunk. Father would talk about his daughter. A woman would talk about her husband, losing a loved one to people like me. And that had an incredible impact on me, so much so that I started drinking again a month later. It took me a month. That's all it took me, in a car. But after that, I thought, gosh, you know what? I'm going to quit drinking. This was the first of many times I said, I'm going to stop, you know? And by the way, I got struck sober. I didn't decide to get sober. I got struck sober. One day I was hammered after my second time in jail for drunk driving. And a couple days later, I knew I was done, but I'll get to that. So I had this DUI, and there was an organization here. They're probably still around, but they were pretty big back then, called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. So, and it was basically that, mothers primarily who had lost children to drunk drivers. And so I decided that I would call up Mothers Against Driving and offer my services and say, listen, I am a drunk driver and I'm quitting drinking, and I would like to talk about my point of view and my decisions and what that led to and so on and so forth, and talk about your organization. So they were taken aback at first, but they said, okay. So I got a call from a local news station, and they came over a few days before New Year's and they interviewed me. And I got all dolled up for the interview, I had a tie and everything. And, it was all about me. It really wasn't about helping anybody. It was all about me. I was on TV. Never been on TV, and I made the most of it. I was like, don't drink and drive. Whatever you do, especially New Year's, call somebody, take a cab, don't drink and drive like I did. And by the way, I'm not drinking anymore. Do it with me, people. And so that was that. And I felt good about myself. Boy, let me tell you, I felt really good about myself. And I was calling people, letting them know, hey, I'm on TV. I'm on TV. I'm on TV. It was always transactional, the way I help people. Always transactional. Not like we do in AA. We do things out of love. We speak the language of the heart in AA. And part of that is doing for others without expecting anything in return. But I always wanted something in return. If I helped you move, I would gladly help you move. But I tell you, if I was moving 4 years later, I would call on you and say, do you remember the time I helped you move? You got to help me move now. That's the way it was with me. So I didn't drink for a couple of weeks. And then one night I said, you know what? I miss going out to the club and the bar. So I started taking cabs. And about 2 weeks later, I decided that I was a good driver when I was drunk. How many people have decided that? So I thought that I could drive drunk, no problem. And, I did. I did for a while. And about 3 months before the 5-year anniversary of that first DUI. Oh, and by the way, you spend a little time in jail. It's only like 7, 8 hours. I didn't spend any more time than that. They want you to sober up, and sitting in the middle of a room with other ne'er-do-wells from that night, and you're basically just waiting around. There's no orange jumpsuit or anything like that, but I really sat there with myself and knew that I had done something wrong. Anyway, I was doing wrong again. So a few months before that 5th-year anniversary, I got my second DUI. I was coming out of a club, and I started driving, and lights went on. Cop pulled me over. And man, I got so angry at that police officer for stopping me. How dare he? And I started yelling at this guy, yelling at him. And later on, when I got sober, I wanted to find that guy so bad, because I was so grateful at that point that I got stopped for that second DUI. It wasn't the first time. It took the second time. And I was so grateful. Sometimes I'll hear people in AA say, I'm grateful I never got a DUI and all that. I'm so grateful that I got 2 DUIs. First one didn't do it. And so when you get a second DUI in the state of Florida, you lose your license for 5 years. So you have 1 year of hard time, which basically you can't go anywhere. And then after 5 years, after 4 years, you can go to church, doctor's appointments, school, and grocery stores. That's it. So, I was 42 when I got sober. I was a late bloomer. I was 42. So here I am riding around my neighborhood on my bike, getting groceries and things like that. So usually when I see a guy my age riding around on a bike with baskets with groceries, I'm usually like, he's one of me. I know that guy, because I was that guy. And I was living with my daughter at the time. And after she picked me up at the jail, I was very ashamed. And because of my shame, I decided the best thing to do is get drunk. So for 2 days, that's what I did. I drank at home. And then I woke up one morning and decided, just like I said, I got struck sober. Something kicked me into sobriety before I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it wouldn't have stuck if I hadn't come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. It would not have stuck. I realized that I have a small window of opportunity to take action in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if I don't take the action, it usually doesn't end up well. So I knew that I had to do something different. So I'm getting ready to call central office, and there's a good old boy who's in charge of central office here, or he's a trusted servant here. And he's been there since I started, came in. And as I'm getting ready to make the call, I didn't really know anything about AA at that point. I had been to a meeting when I was like 22, and I walked in, I walked out. This wasn't for me. And so by the time I get on the phone, I'm already thinking to myself, well, maybe not AA. Then I thought, well, there's no meeting around here. There's no public transportation. I can't drive. Even if there's a meeting, I can't get to it. So by the time I pick up the phone, I'm already thinking AA isn't for me, without even giving AA the opportunity to do what it does for me. Not to me, but for me. And so I called Tim and I said, listen, this is my situation, and I'm sure you don't have a meeting. I don't know a lot about it. He goes, oh, there's a meeting right down the street from your house. Of course there is. Of course. I don't know how many times this has happened to you in AA where the meeting is exactly where it is, right when you need it. The people that share are the people you need to hear right when they share it. The topic is so many times something that I was talking about that day or that morning to somebody. And that's the topic. It's brilliant. It's really brilliant. Running into people in Los Angeles that I knew from St. Petersburg, I hadn't seen in years. And then I go to a meeting out there and there they are. It's crazy. And I had just been talking to them like 2 hours before to my friend. Hey, have you ever heard of so-and-so? No, I haven't. Well, yeah, he's in St. Pete. We get to the meeting and there the guy is. He moved out to California. I didn't know. We about fell over, by the way. So I rode my bike to my first meeting. And it's kind of in an affluent area. So I'm riding my bike and I'm already doing the ride of shame. And I put my bike into the church. It was Grace Episcopal Church. And I slithered under the door and took my seat. Back then I had this beautiful head of hair. I mean, it was beautiful. So when it was not beautiful, it was like all over the place. It was all matted down and I hadn't shaved and all this sort of thing. And I was sitting there and, I have tremors even without coffee. And coming off of booze, I was shaking like crazy and I had coffee and, and then I'm thinking to myself, I hope they don't know I'm new. Of course they knew I was new. Of course they could see it. They could see the deer in the headlights look. They could see everything, the pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. They knew right away. And there's like 50 people in there. And they start passing around the phone, the phone list. Men gave me their phone numbers. And I was upset because I thought that I had to write my phone number like they were calling a roll. And they finally said, no, dude, that is for you. You got to call people. And I was like, I got to call people. What kind of outfit is this, But then I realized they were just wanting to help me. Like they didn't say, you better call me or else. They didn't say, I didn't get any of that. I did not get any of that. And that first night I was hunched over, I was nervous, I was coming down, and I wasn't taking a lot in, but I had a moment of clarity, and her name was Marie. She was walking down the aisle, and I saw her, and for a brief second, my mind cleared up, and I thought, oh, she's pretty, and then I went back into my thing, And as it turned out, a couple years later, I married Marie. Marie and I married each other, so she had 5 years longer than me. And I was in a sober marriage, which I loved. My life was sobriety. when I got married. And so my first year of sobriety, I couldn't drive anywhere. And at my first meeting, people said, "Hey, do you want to go to more meetings?" I was like, "Yeah, but I only have a bike." And they go, "Oh, we'll take you." And I'm thinking to myself, for what? I don't have any money, and I'm thinking, I don't, why are these people trying to help me? They don't know me. I'm just here because I want to stop drinking. And you know how some people say, I wanted to learn how to drink like a gentleman? I didn't want to learn how to drink like anybody. I knew to my bones that I had a problem with alcohol. I didn't know what an alcoholic was until I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I knew I had a problem with alcohol. I didn't want to learn to drink like a gentleman. I don't even know what that means. I don't know what it means to drink like a regular person, like it talks about in the book. That's the obsession of every abnormal drinker, to drink like a normal person. I don't even know what that means. I certainly didn't want to drink like a normal person. I always wanted to drink to get loaded, to get hammered. It was never for the taste. It was never to be sophisticated. It was because I wanted to have fun. It was because I wanted to anesthetize myself. And that was the big find for me in Alcoholics Anonymous, when I realized that, the old adage that that alcohol was not my problem, it was my solution. And my main problem was me. And Alcoholics Anonymous taught me that through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I get to know who I am, which to me is one of the most important and most impactful things I can do with my life, is to find out who I am and what I'm all about. And Alcoholics Anonymous has given me the opportunity to do that in the fourth step, sharing it in the fifth step, in the 10th step, in step 11. So really, we have 4 inventories. We have our 4-step inventory. We have a nightly review. We have an on-the-spot inventory and an annual house cleaning. These are all talked about in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I found out how important inventory was to my own recovery. But I'll get to that. So people offered to take me to meetings. I didn't know any of these people, and they drove me to meetings for a long, long time. Another thing that happened in that first meeting is the couple that started it is a Big Book study. I got sober on November 18th. They asked me if I had anywhere to go for Thanksgiving. I said no, because my family's in Chicago. And actually, it was just my dad and my stepmom. I wasn't close to my stepfamily. My dad had gotten remarried. My parents went through a divorce. I saw my mom for a little while, then she moved on. I never saw her again. And all those things that happened to me as a kid, and my mom and all that sort of thing, I drank to quell those feelings. I drank because I had this trauma. That was my excuse. And I blamed my mom. I blamed the mom who gave me up for adoption. I blamed my dad. I blamed all these people. And as it turns out, my father was my hero. He never gave up on me. When he was in his 80s and he was kind of getting lost upstairs, he would say, "Hey, Pete, you still with that AAA?" And I said, "Yeah, still with AAA." And yeah. So in any case, I remember the first time I drank with my dad. I had a beer and I just threw it down. Wasn't a beer drinker. I was a hard liquor drinker, but I threw it down and my dad said, "Pete, slow, sip on it." And I was like, "Sip on it? What does that even mean? I'm not going to sip on anything. I need to get where I need to get as fast as I can get there, because I'm uncomfortable. I don't feel right around these people. I need to get someplace. And I need to forget everything. I need to put on this new suit and be a different person instead of just being myself, because I had no confidence in who I was." So they asked me if I was doing anything for Thanksgiving. I said no. So a week later, I'm at their house, 5 kids, Thanksgiving. And then later on that spring, they took me to the Florida State Convention in Jacksonville, Florida. These are people that I just met, literally just met, driving me to meetings. And because of that, I was able to jump into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I believe that if I had not been given that opportunity, really been forced to do it, not by other people, just my situation, that my program would have turned out differently. I think it's important when I sponsor someone, I let them know right off the bat, if you're in 100%, I'm in 100%. If you're in 10%, it's 10%, man. And I'll tell you, in the last 6 months, I've had 3 sponsees relapse multiple times. One was in the hospital twice in the last month, just got out on Thursday. And I used to be of the school of thought, like I had this codependency issue. I know no other alcoholics have that issue, but I had this codependency issue. I don't know, maybe somebody can relate. I had this codependency issue. I felt like if you needed help, I was the guy to give you the help. In fact, I insisted upon it. If you ran the other way, I would chase you and go, "You need my help." And I would do that I was doing that with guys who relapse. I was like, "Oh my God, this guy, I know I know I can help him. I know I can change him. Leave me alone. No, I'm going to help you." And I would chase guy. And I tell you, if you want to lose respect fast, be that way. This one guy lost respect for me, which I totally get. But in any case, I got to the point, and this is after a lot of years of sobriety. It just happened to me in the last few months where I was told by friends and my sponsor, "Listen, man, it's not your thing. You show people what you've learned from other people, and if they want what you have, they'll do the deal." And so I just decided at that point, I'm not going to chase anymore. Doesn't mean that I don't care. It does not mean that I don't care. Doesn't mean I won't answer calls. Doesn't mean that. It just means that I've got boundaries. I've got boundaries and I have to set them because some people will take advantage of them. How do I know that? Because I did that. I took advantage of people. I definitely took advantage of people's largesse before Alcoholics Anonymous, in Alcoholics Anonymous. In alcohol's behavior, I've behaved pretty badly on occasion, sober, believe it or not. You know, I have character defects. I get angry, I get frustrated. There's a guy in Tampa and he is a service warrior. He's got like 45 years sober. And he was sharing last night at a meeting that he said, my wife, when I first met her in 86 or whatever, I was doing Alcoholics Anonymous. And my wife said, "You're the most selfish person I've ever met in my life." And he said, "Me?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "If you were to ask her today if I've changed from that selfish, self-centered person after all these years, she would probably say, barely." And I would like to think that I have progressed a little better than that. But the reason why I stick around is not just because I want freedom from alcohols. I want freedom from the bondage of self. I don't want to be partially free. I want to be all the way free, right? Because I'm in a cage of my own making. And the key lock is on the inside. And the key lock is called what? Willingness. And I got to open it up. I just have to do that. And that's where inventory comes in because I get to know myself and look for patterns in my behavior. And in that 4-step, I was taught, and by the way, I wanted to say that when people spoke and the way they communicated to me, especially sponsors or people in my own network, people that I gravitated towards were people that told me about their own experience, people that told me what they did, people that didn't just use the words. Because I can admit I'm an alcoholic all day long. I can pray all day long, but if I don't do anything about it, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I'm Peter Mantis. I'm an alcoholic. Okay, now what? Got to do the work. An admission is just an admission. The work is the work. And I would gravitate towards these people who talked like that, who acted like that, who lived the life. I know a lot of people who know the book really well. That doesn't mean I want what they have. I have a friend, he just celebrated 4 years sober, and he's a service warrior. And I love the guy. And he loves the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I gave him his 4-year medallion last year, and I said, and it was at a newcomers meeting. I said, "Scott, what's on page, where does it start talking about the first step? Where does it say this? Where does it say that?" So what's the shortest paragraph in the book? It works. It really does. And I said, "Isn't that amazing, everybody?" And they're like, "Yes, it's so amazing." I go, "No, it's not. It's not amazing. What's amazing is how he works this program." So a lot of times, I- if I could, when I speak from the podium, I would love to just talk about everyone else I know the entire time, because there's so many people that I know that are like doing the deal. And I'm not just talking about Alcoholics Anonymous, but living the life. It's somewhere in the book and I'm paraphrasing. I'm not a quote guy, but there are a couple things that I like. And one of them is that being relieved from the bondage of self in the 3rd-step prayer. I believe that's a prayer within a prayer. And sometimes I'll just say that, relieve me of the bondage of self. Bondage means, right? Bondage. I'm tied up into it. I'm all in, right? I got to break away from this stuff. And, this program is all about deflating Peter's ego because Peter's the problem. I'm my own problem. And I like that. And I like where it says in the family afterwards, I love this part. Let me see real quick. Well, one thing I love is those of us who have spent much time in the world of spiritual make believe have eventually seen the childishness of it. This dream world has been replaced by a great sense of purpose, accompanied by a growing consciousness of the power of God in our lives. We've come to believe He would like us to keep our heads in the clouds with Him, but that our feet ought to be firmly planted on earth. That is where our fellow travelers are, and that is where our work must be done, because there is such a thing as spiritual bypassing. And that is, I get tied up in that and I really forget what's going on in the real world. I have to apply what you guys teach me to the real world. How I react in traffic, how I react when someone how I react to someone being of service to me on the phone, how I react to AI these days on the phone, all of that. How do I act in the real world? Because I can sit for an hour in a meeting of AA and I feel safe and protected, right? I feel safe and protected in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can do that for an hour. But what am I going to do between the Lord's Prayer at the end of that meeting? I don't know if you all do the Lord's Prayer, but we do the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting. What am I going to do between the Lord's Prayer and the next serenity prayer that comes in the next meeting I have? If I'm going to a meeting next week, how am I going to be the next week, the next day, 2 days later, if I hit my next meeting? What do I do between those times, between the Lord's Prayer and the next serenity prayer that we say in that next meeting that I go to? How am I going to act? You know? Thank you, Alcoholics Anonymous, for teaching me how to do that. And again, that's where timer, could you tell me where I'm at? I'll look for it.
12 minutes.
Okay. So that's where, that's one of the most powerful things I love about Alcoholics Anonymous is this idea of inventory. So I do this inventory in the 4-step, and yeah, I'm all about that first column, who I resent. I'm all about that column. I resent so and so. Why? How did it affect me? My pocketbook. Oh, it affected me big time. Yeah, all these things affected me this way. And then that 4th column comes up. Oh my goodness, what's that 4th column all about? Well, it turns out that 4th column is about the whole thing, and I can basically not even have to look at those first 3 columns. Because why? The 4th column tells me where Peter was frightened, insecure, selfish, self-centered, dishonest, and afraid. And then I see patterns. And my sponsor said, yeah, look what comes out the most in your behavior. All these resentments. You were pretty selfish, weren't you? Yes, I was. I was. And that shows up in the 10th step as well. Doing, on the spot inventory. Oh my God, I'm angry right now. Why? Do I feel threatened? Yes, I'm frightened. I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'm going to lose this. I'm afraid I'm going to not get this. I'm afraid that this person's going to judge me. Okay, what do? I owe someone an apology at once. Boom. Nightly review. 7 questions, I think it is at night. Same thing. Where was I selfish, self-seeking, frightened, insecure, and dishonest? And that stuff shows up all the time. But guess what? I learn the patterns to look for. And I learn when I'm triggered. I learn how I react to things. And AA gives me an opportunity to do that all the time, not just on my own, not just looking at myself, but having other people look at me. And I'm all about changing my behavior. And if you're in my circle, I want people to take my inventory. I don't want everybody to take my inventory. When I first did the 4-step, I decided that everybody should hear my 4th step. I would recommend you not do that because nobody else wanted to hear my 4th step. And as it turns out, I got to a point where when I started speaking, I thought, man, my story is quite pedestrian. I got a couple DUIs, I got arrested, blah, blah, blah. And I hated speaking after someone who had a prison story. That was his story. Because the worse your story is in AA, the more attention you get. And I was even looking for attention in AA. I wanted to be the guy. My old home group, there was a new gal, and we went next door for a meeting after the meeting. And she said to me, Peter, are you the president of Alcoholics Anonymous? And I was like, no, but I should be. Because I really thought I should be. And I told my sponsor, and I was laughing. He said, that's not funny. He said, that's your ego. Those are your instincts going awry. And so I learned a lesson there. So I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love that it gives me the opportunity to be of service. AA saved my life and service saved my AA. And there's a myriad of ways we can be of service, right? It's not just sponsorship, right? You guys being here at this meeting is service. Thank you so much for asking me to speak, to Carolina for asking me to speak, and for you guys being here. You guys are being of service to me. And we set the bar so low in Alcoholics Anonymous to be of service. Like if you want to do something, we'll let you do it. You want to paint the place? Sure, paint the place. I've seen a guy come up and, and we need a treasurer. So treasurer, would you like to be our treasurer? Yeah, but I was in prison for fraud and grand larceny. That's okay. Here's a key. You know, I mean, that's the way it is. We speak the language of the heart in AA. We speak the language of the heart, and I love that about Alcoholics Anonymous. And I will close with this reading, if I may. And I'm a big believer in that adage: "We are not a glum lot. We absolutely insist on enjoying life." And I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but oftentimes we're the loudest group in the restaurant. We're having the most fun. And when I get sober firsts are the best. First concert sober, it's great. First meal out, sober, fantastic. Sex, great. Sex with another person, even better. It's all good. So let me read this to you. I love this. This is from those golden years, third edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. When I retired, I said I'd never be bored. AA has not let me down there. How full it has kept my retirement years, the 5 I've lived since the first 2, but in traveling a rocky road to hell before I made a U-turn. This is it right here. Not long ago, I was lunching with another retired publicist. He was close to tears in describing his boredom without an activity. He said, "How I envy you for whatever you found." He did not know it was AA, and it was useless to tell him, for he doesn't have our disease. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that attitude? And I see that all the time. I tried to encourage a search for some new goal, but I couldn't help thinking, "You poor guy, I feel so sorry for you. You're not an alcoholic. You can never know the pure joy of recovering within the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous." That's awesome. That's all. Thank you for letting me share.
Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to enjoy a shot glass of recovery. If you'd like to help support the show, you can make a voluntary contribution through PayPal at A Shot Glass of Recovery. Every donation, no matter the amount, helps cover the costs of producing the podcast and allows us to keep sharing stories of hope and recovery. Thanks again for your support. It truly means a lot.
Everything you do, the answer lies inside you.